When you're using panels for this, it's great because it's a cheap and easy way to get it out to market. Like strap a bunch of LEDs to a circuit board and put it in a box. That, like, how much cheaper and easier can you get? The problem is that as a photon delivery system, this is not very accurate. So if you're 2 inches closer or 2 inches further away, it's a really big difference on the dosing. When you're using LEDs, they emit light in what's called a Lambertian patterns. When you're trying to dose internal tissue, it's really not the best. It just doesn't allow you to kind of penetrate through to that. And if you are turning up the power enough to penetrate through to the internal tissue with an LED, then the superficial tissue is being overdosed. And so there's just a balance there to be found. That's essentially what we've done with our devices. Is deep red is one of the best wavelengths to be able to use for the shallower tissue. Then we use lasers for the infrared to penetrate through and dose the internal tissue and photoacceptors.
And we are live. Forrest, how are you, brother?
Doing awesome. So excited to be here today.
Hey, excited to be chatting with you, man. Where are you located at?
I'm in central Mexico, up in the mountains. It's a mountain town called Querétaro, which is been a great place to live. I normally live in China, but I moved to Mexico when COVID started without really intentionally doing so. It just we went traveling because China was going crazy with COVID, and we didn't want to get locked in, and we got locked out. So my dog and my house and everything were still there, and I couldn't get back to them. And so we moved to Mexico kind of just overnight, just without being able to get back to our house. So we've been here for about 4 years now.
Awesome. Where are you from originally?
Atlanta.
So I want to know, man. How'd you go from Atlanta to China and then Mexico, I guess, with the pandemic? But what brought you to China?
I studied Chinese in school, and I went over as part of my Chinese study to go study at Nanjing University, and I really liked it. And so I wanted to move back, and I did. I was starting a business, and I got up to a point where it could kind of pay me enough to leave school and go kind of do my own thing from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And I love that. I've always kind of liked building businesses, and one nice thing about being young and being an entrepreneur is you don't know what you don't know, and so there's a there's a hubris that goes with that, and hubris and ignorance are pretty highly correlated, I imagine, and that's kind of what drove me to start building my first businesses in China, and I loved it, so I stayed almost 20 years there. Nice. When
did you launch KINEON?
About 4.5 years ago. I actually met my current business partner through China. I played rugby with his younger brother in Guangzhou for the city team, the Guangzhou Rams, who I love. One of my favorite sports ever. I took it up at the ripe young age of 38, which is probably not when you want to take up rugby, if I had to suggest it for people. But I was playing rugby with Max, who is the younger brother of my business partner, Tom. And I wanted to start a business that was mission driven. And I was saying some things to him about this when we were having a coffee that triggered for him the idea that his brother had used some of the same language. And so he connected us, and we ended up spending 2 months before we even looked at technology or building a company or anything, talking about what our mission should be. And what that came down to in the end was increasing the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most substantial and measurable way we can. And that kind of holds us, that's essentially our North Star as a company. And it holds us accountable for, how do we get this, get technology on people that's going to help them improve their life? How do we keep it cheap enough that a lot of people can adopt it? But how do we make it something that's meaningful enough from a measurement standpoint that's going to really kind of change the trajectory of what they do? And we see so many different testimonial stories coming in these days of people getting out of pain and back into movement that it's been a really gratifying journey to go through.
No, man, it's awesome. Were you? Because you were building businesses before launching KINEON 4.5 years ago. So, what was the difference? What kept you from continuing on the prior business endeavors before starting this one?
We ended up being acquired. So typically, the smaller ones when I was younger, we ended up selling off and having them acquired at a smaller size because I would hit a ceiling for what my competence level would allow me to do. So it's great to have hubris, but occasionally you run into a wall of reality from a performance standpoint and a competence standpoint. And, my first business, I did everything. I didn't know how to delegate. I didn't know how to plan. I didn't know how to so you just end up learning a lot of different things. And there's a ceiling to that from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And so every business kind of got, bigger and bigger as we went, and really started kind of getting closer and closer to what those missions were that I felt could move the needle from a systemic standpoint. So the business before this was an LED lighting and controls business when LEDs were coming out, trying to reduce electrical load, trying to leverage technology in a way that could really help promote people adopting green and clean energy sources a lot faster, because you could lower the load from a lighting standpoint, and then also just doing things from a health standpoint with lighting. So that was actually acquired by Eaton, which is I think the second largest lighting company in the world at the time, and open another chapter, and here we are. And I feel like with each successive business, it's dialed in a little bit more directly what that outcome wants to be from a systemic standpoint, which with what we're doing right now, we're finding most of our users are moving away from pharmaceutical solutions and finding a much healthier path to treat the underlying issue of inflammation or what's causing their pain versus kind of trying to dope their way through it. And again, that's really in line with what our kind of ethos and focus and mission are as a company.
What was the first business? Was it in the health space too, or totally apart from that?
Totally apart. So it's come more and more in this direction over time. The first business was a fabric business, buying and reselling, and then kind of designing and buying and reselling and re-engineering and et cetera, different fabrics. And what I found was that when I'm in commodity businesses, the amount of value that I can add for those has been more limited. What I tend to do better at is when, and what I tend to have happier users on is when I can synthesize a lot of really difficult data. And so for what we do with KINEON, that's really there's a gap between what we see from laser and technology and engineering experts and physiology experts relative to how light therapy could be applied to the physiology and what you can expect from a adaptation standpoint. And so we really live in the middle of that with a really strong kind of, our CTO is an atomic physicist with a huge amount of laser experience. Our chief physiologist is an MIT guy who's a bioinformatics kind of specialist. And we're really, really deep on both the technical and I would say both of these are technical. So the technical aspect from an engineering and product and laser standpoint, but also from a physiology standpoint. And I think that separates us from a lot of the competitors that we have in the field.
Yeah, the red light therapy has gotten super hot within the biohacking space. I mean, when I go to these conferences to speak on nutrition, I mean, there are more and more booths and companies and brands that are coming into that market. Were you dealing with any type of ailment or injury that kind of motivated you to dive down that rabbit hole even further?
One big one is I'm just getting old. I'm middle age now, 45 years old, turning 46 this year. Still playing rugby, still training CrossFit, still a bit of a knucklehead as to how to avoid the injuries and the downtime from that. And I think the old kind of the old injuries that have come out of that from kind of being a lifelong competitor, torn meniscus. With meniscus, surgery is hit or miss, and even when you have a hit, when you have a successful surgery, the outcomes aren't great. So with meniscus tears, you often end up just kind of lifelong chronic inflammation, and so that was one point. Lower back injuries. I tore muscles in my lower back grappling when I was younger, and so that flares up. Old injuries. We find this with a lot of athletes that we interact with, is that applying targeted laser therapy to this tissue, often the tissue that's had traumatic damage from sports, from injuries, from surgery, from car accidents, it doesn't heal 100%. And so you see impaired cardiovascular delivery to that tissue. And people often re-injure the same tissue because of that. So it just becomes kind of a weak point. And for me, that weak point was the left knee and the lower back. And it doesn't help that I'm 6'3" as a CrossFitter is a little bit kind of outside the standard deviation norms. And so I with deadlifts and things like this, or like trying ego lifting, trying to go too heavy on Olympic lifts and stuff like this, I tweak my back a lot. And so those two things, it used to be if I tweak my back doing deadlifts, I'm out for a couple of months. We now have with these targeted laser therapies, I'm back in and moving and probably not moving, the 100% of the weight, but like back in and moving 50% of the weight within 3 or 4 days, which is life-changing for me. That's just been kind of awesome. So that's how I've been applying it personally. I would say that one thing that's come up recently that we work with a lab out of Japan that developed a really cool therapy protocol called proximal priority therapy. And it's essentially taking the modules and aligning them on your neck, because your largest blood vessels in your body are kind of go through your neck, and that gives you very kind of close to the surface access to them. And so doing the neck for treating the blood with the lasers, and then doing the lower gut. Your gut is just the center of everything. Both from a neurological standpoint, which is kind of counterintuitive, but also from an immune health and what they call from the research standpoint affect. So just how you feel, your mood on a daily basis. Long story short, I've been doing this kind of neck and gut treatment that we started with them just from a trial standpoint. After about 10 days or 2 weeks, I was just feeling amazing from this. And so I've kept that one on for like the last year. I get sick, 1/10 of as much as I used to. I have 2 kids, and so they drag in stuff from school. This has been amazing from an immune response and from a training recovery, and really just that affect, like how I feel on a daily basis standpoint. So if people are up for trying it out, it's a really cool protocol to try.
Were you dabbling with, using laser treatment for your ailments before you built your own? Were you like looking at other competitors in the market, using those, seeing benefit from them, like, okay, I can do this better?
Yeah, we and I don't like to knock other people's products, because there's kind of there's with new technologies, there's always kind of these kind of phases of how products roll out and get better over time. But I think, essentially a couple of the things that were out there when we launched our product, the only thing that was out there from a laser standpoint when we launched our product was essentially desktop handheld devices, which are both $30,000 to $50,000 and not convenient and not travel friendly and hard to build real kind of meaningful habits around. And those were the only ones that were really dosing effectively. The kind of the first generation, what we look at as early generation designs for bio-modulation or panels, and they're just not very good for it's great because it exposes people to the idea and the kind of the concept and kind of some of the underpinning mechanisms and research around photobiomodulation. But what we've found, and what the literature has shown from a medical research standpoint, is that light is kind of like pharmaceuticals in a couple of ways. One is that the body responds to it in what's known as a biphasic or Arndt-Schultz curve, which essentially just means like the more photons you deliver up to a certain point, the better the outcomes get, and then it jumps the shark, and the more photons you deliver, the less effective it is. So that kind of sine wave type look. When you're using panels for this, it's great because it's a cheap and easy way to get it out to market. Like strap a bunch of LEDs to a circuit board and put it in a box. That like how much cheaper and easier can you get? The problem is that as a photon delivery system, this is not very accurate. So if you're 2 inches closer or 2 inches further away, it's a really big difference on the dosing. And the second piece of that dosing is that when you're using LEDs, they emit light in what's called a Lambertian pattern. So they're a chip-based technology. The chips emit light in 360 degrees. They're kind of fabbed through they're grown through what's called a metal organic vapor, chemical vapor deposition process, where you have like a sapphire base and you just grow these semiconductors on top of it. They're then etched, but when you put them into an electronic part to be able to use them in a device, what happens is that restricts that 360 degree emission pattern back down to 120 degrees. That's still really broad. So when you're when you're trying to get into internal tissue and dose some of these internal areas of the body and some of the internal photoacceptors, it's not terrible for dosing, skin. If you'd like to increase collagen and kind of do an anti-aging thing, it's still not great because you can't really measure it very effectively and you can't standardize it. So you don't really see these used in medical trials. But when you're trying to dose internal tissue, it's really not the best. It just doesn't allow you to kind of penetrate through to that. And if you are turning up the power enough to penetrate through to the internal tissue with an LED, then the superficial tissue is being overdosed. And so there's just a balance there to be found. And that's essentially what we've done with our devices is balanced a red light. Deep red is one of the best wavelengths to be able to use for the shallower tissue. But even with the deep red, you want it to be able to penetrate a little bit better than it does with 120. So we use deep red for our superficial treatment, and for the tissue that's more superficial, kind of the skin tissue, and just below that. And that's actually with a 30-degree primary optic. So it goes from 120 back down to 30. And then we use lasers for the infrared to penetrate through and dose the internal tissue and photoacceptors. And that's a really big difference from an outcome standpoint that you can drive when you're dosing essentially in 3D versus just a 2D superficial dosing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, plus it's just way more convenient how y'all have it set up on a strap where you can put it wherever it needs to be. I mean, the people that have the massive panels, I typically see them just in the corner of their bedroom emitting red light through the room, but not dosing, not standardized, not effective at all.
Yeah, again, it's why you don't see them in research papers is because, researchers have set amount of dollars they're going to put into things. And so they want to know what the dose is so they can know what the outcomes are going to be. And when you're doing that from a just kind of spray and pray type approach, you can't. And we work with a number of different labs around the world. There's been such a kind of an awesome, it's just a great time to be alive as a technologist for being able to interact with these different labs about what they're treating with this. But that's one of the things we found is the labs are also super excited because they're like, oh, you mean I don't have to pay for a $30,000 to $50,000 device, and I can get I can take this and put it on 100 people instead, and kind of So that's been one of the best things for us though is the kind of how our assumptions in designing the product were that if we reduce the price from $30K plus down to sub $500, that we can we're going to drive more adoption, and that people will consider this instead of taking NSAIDs or opiates or whatever they're using for their pain right now, or their inflammation and chronic pain right now. And if we can help them make it easier to use, make it travel friendly, make it easy to charge, make it something we actually had one of the first NFL teams that we started working with. They're on planes so much that their head physio was like, I can't get my guys in a bed for these things, but they love using the devices. But when I carry it on the plane, I got to carry these things, and they're bringing out the rubber gloves every time I go through security. So we went, just on his behalf, we went through a couple more extra FCC processes. Just to make sure that you can carry it on a plane with you. The batteries are all cleared. It's not going to blow it up like Samsung devices or anything like this. You can maintain your, while you're traveling on the road, you can maintain your habits, because if you're able to stack this with something that you do on a daily basis, people see amazing results. This is really what drives the best results is consistency. And what drives consistency is habits. So, there's a bunch of books out there, Atomic Habits, a number of different books on why building habits is so powerful. But we've seen the same thing, particularly with our older users. They have very strong habits. And when you can get them to include this in with their pragmatic, not kind of aspirational habits, they do amazingly. They're just so happy, and they get great benefits from a tissue improvement standpoint, pain reduction, just seeing people get back into movement. That's again, it's our mission, it's what we're here for, but it's so gratifying.
Totally, man. Can you kind of just go down the rabbit hole and talk about the physiology? Why is bio-modulation beneficial? What's the use case scenario? Who would benefit from it? Just kind of go into the weeds on that.
Absolutely. So I think there's there's a number of different pathologies. So instead of kind of diving in for all the different pathologies, I'd like to just start with some of the mechanisms. Increased blood flow We release nitric oxide into the blood. It's a dilating factor, so you see increased blood flow to the area that you're treating. But also, when you increase nitric oxide into your blood flow, not only is it going to dilate those capillaries, it also teaches them to dilate more effectively. So you de-stiffen your cardiovascular tissue. So your blood vessels get more pliable. And one of the big risks for older generation is when you don't have, it's kind of like your house. If you think about kind of, instead of having pipes through our house, we have these blood vessels. And then when they get older and are rustier, they're going to break. And this is one of the things that's one of the kind of largest risks for mortality for older users is the fact that they're, instead of being rust, it's just the fact that they stiffen. And so when you can increase pliability for these blood vessels, it makes a massive difference for people from a mortality standpoint, because you're just removing the rust from the pipes. So, getting the blood flow better, getting the pipes with the rust removed, and then the inflammation and oxidative stress. These are two of the biggest things that drive negative outcomes for everyone's health on a daily basis. And so there's a couple of different ways you can manage those: training, diet, and environment. Staying away from kind of pollution and microplastics and keeping your environment healthy are great. There's very few tools in our toolkit aside from photobiomodulation that help you impact oxidative stress measurably and substantially as soon as you use it. So reducing oxidative stress is a really big one, and reducing inflammation because of that is a very big one. And we can kind of go into how those work and what triggers that from a stimulation standpoint. But I would say that's the three biggest things that are mechanisms for helping to solve different pathologies and just get users healthier.
Totally. And from like a study standpoint, what studies have been done on photobiomodulation? How are those studies typically conducted? What are they measuring? Like, just kind of give us some stats on what the literature shows.
Absolutely. So it's a great question. It's not a short one to answer. Our team contribute to an international group that bring together and manage a database on all of the different studies on photobiomodulation. There's over 7,000 already, and so they're on a huge number of topics. The impacts from these, so the most common ones are things like, from an inflammation standpoint, we have different cytokine loads. We have muscle inflammatory markers like C-reactive proteins and creatine kinase. There are some more broad-based inflammatory markers and again, we have full kind of write-ups on this that I'll send over to you so you can kind of link back to. It's quite a lot, and our team gets a little angry if I start going on the biochemistry too heavily. But long story short, there's a huge and heavy amount of data on the mechanisms underpinning inflammation. When you're looking at nitric oxide, so I mentioned nitric oxide as a piece that we also interact with. How the nitric oxide signaling works is this happens both inside the cell and in the bloodstream. In the bloodstream is a lot higher volume, just because there's more hemoglobin in your body than there is cytochrome C oxidase. So I'll start with the hemoglobin first. But when you're triggering hemoglobin, it's primarily done through the 808 nanometer wavelength in the near infrared range. It's invisible to our eyes, but when you start treating the hemoglobin has 4 binding sites that are competitive for oxygen and nitric oxide. This just reduces the affinity of nitric oxide to bind to those sites. So what happens is there's so much hemoglobin throughout your body and so much blood throughout your body that whenever you're triggering it with this 808 nanometer light, you dump that nitric oxide, and there's 2 big outcomes from that. One is that hemoglobin now has more space to bind on oxygen, so it's going to deliver oxygen more effectively. And the second is when you dump out that nitric oxide, you're expanding or dilating those capillaries and blood vessels and delivering blood more effectively. And so when you combine those two, there's just a synergistic effect for being able to deliver energy and oxygen more effectively into regions of the body. With the oxidative stress, that's the other piece of the nitric oxide. When you're triggering, so when we trigger hemoglobin, there's 4 binding sites. There's an enzyme in the mitochondria called cytochrome C oxidase, which also binds nitric oxide, but it's a bottleneck for energy production in the cell. And so energy production in the cell we measure through ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And the production of adenosine triphosphate increases to double when you remove this bottleneck. So when we can treat that cytochrome C oxidase, there's a lot less of those because there's kind of this is in the essentially the phospholipid bilayer of the mitochondria, which is more or less the cell wall of the mitochondria between the kind of internal mitochondria and then the external cell, which then has its own kind of cell wall around it. But it triggers a lot of signaling within the cell. And so this is called mitochondrial retrograde signaling, essentially the signaling between the mitochondria and the nucleus of your cell. This is the area where we measure oxidative stress. And there's a couple of ways we try to capture this with metaphors because it's a bit of a biochemistry one to go down. But what our head of research has come up with, because we had a really fun trip to go talk to some researchers at Texas Tech recently. And so being in Texas, we try to get it back into a football metaphor. And essentially, when you're able to allow that cytochrome C oxidase to move faster in its role in the mitochondria, it's like an offense running more plays. In the end, you're going to end up with more yards and more touchdowns, but there's a very short-term spike in oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species, and your body actually learns, very similar to kind of exercise, how to modulate those more effectively downstream. So what happens is it flattens those out and goes down below the oxidative stress level that it had originally. And so we run more plays, we get more yards, we get more touchdowns, but there are more dropped passes as well. And so those reactive oxygen species are kind of the dropped passes between the mitochondria and the nucleus from a signaling standpoint. But again, it's a very short-term increase in those and then going back down below that oxidative stress threshold.
Gotcha. And all this is happening in the presence of light therapy. What would be... Is there any way to determine or distinguish the difference between how much of this is happening by default when people are exposed to natural sunlight and are in tune with their circadian rhythms versus that of acute light therapy using a device?
So the main difference is that there is a big impact. So I do this myself daily, especially with the kids to go outside and do breathing in the sunlight. It really helps. And there's a big impact for things like hormonal kind of downstream adaptations, and et cetera. The difference with what we're doing from a light therapy standpoint is that you can control this and optimize it. What you get from sunlight, as an example, is a heavy enough band of UVA and UVB to not be super healthy for you. So you don't want to stay out in the sunshine for hours and hours every day. There's actually reasonable amounts that you can do. And I think, those are probably even most of the ones that are advised broadly are probably even relatively conservative. What we find with the infrared and deep red targeted pieces of this is that these are protective against damage from UV. So when you can specifically choose the wavelengths and the power levels and the duty cycle and the frequency and the amplitude, like when you choose all these characteristics and you kind of base this on outcomes that you're targeting relative to the physiology, what kind of adaptations are we trying to trigger? Where are these photoacceptors that are going to drive that? And then how do we most effectively, and this is what we do from our science side, is we build mathematical models to most effectively deliver photons through tissue to the correct photoacceptors. And what that does is essentially just makes your own personal kind of personalized, optimized sun for you. And again, that also protects against damage from UVA and UVB. So those, when you're seeing UVA and UVB, they can actually damage DNA, and there's a number of different kind of downstream negative impacts from that. But a lot of those are mediated through oxidative stress. So if you're treating with photobiomodulation before or after you go out to go do your your sun, essentially you get the best of both worlds. So that's that's a bit of a long answer. That apologies,
No,
long answer to an honest and reasonable question.
So what's I'm just gonna rapid fire here. What's the difference between the infrared and the deep red? Like from a wavelength standpoint, like how do those differ?
So essentially, the infrared penetrates more effectively, and so when we've built our first device, the Move Plus, the two most researched wavelengths in the world relative to the forest plots. So the short answer is red is for more superficial tissue, and infrared's for deeper tissue. The longer answer is we selected these two because they had the most substantial body of work from a medical research standpoint. With our next devices, there's a couple of new laser wavelengths that we'll be adding in for penetration further into the body. So things like the brain, female reproductive tissue, and the gut require additional levels of modeling and planning and design work to make sure that we're delivering the correct and optimal level of photons to the photoacceptors in those areas as well. And we've found that there's two more wavelengths that we're adding in to be able to do that. And so the longer you make these wavelengths, the more that, in general, that they penetrate. So we're adding in for our next ones, the 940 and 1064. The first device really is primarily for joint tissue, soft tissue, and superficial tissue. So kind of your joints, your muscles, and then skin and wound healing type recovery. And those the shorter the wavelengths. So like our first device with the 660 and the 808, those are shorter and penetrate less into the gut, as an example. So hopefully that gives a bit of a framework for it.
And I believe the one I've got is the Move Plus. So that one's using the deep red, right?
That's right. It's deep red LED with a primary optic and then a laser. We use lasers called vertical cavity surface emission lasers for the infrared. And so it's that combination of really how to dose as effectively at every level versus kind of like most other devices are either overdosing the superficial tissue or underdosing the internal tissue.
Gotcha. So let's just kind of dive into some use case scenarios here. So with the Move Plus, you can strap it to any specific body part or region that is, ailing. What would be the workflow for stuff like that? So for instance, I've got an employee that's got like a shoulder issue right now from lifting. He would strap that to his shoulder, and then what would his dosing regimen look like?
So on his shoulder, it's going to be 15 minutes a day. You can do this 15 minutes twice a day, and it'll be roughly a 20% increase in the improvements. But we found that when people try to start doing it twice a day, they have a harder time habit stacking it. So it's much more important to have your 15 minutes a day versus the double version. So 15 minutes a day, find a habit that's not going to interfere with kind of your activities at the time. It's wearable, so you can strap that on, and you have essentially with the device, you have one module in the armpit and then two more that are on either side of the front and back, and target through to that internal synovial fluid in that capsule. That really is where we see the increase in inflammation present, and where we see the best results when people can actually treat it. So it's really targeting it from multiple areas to get the best coverage of that synovial fluid.
And how long would he go about that 15 minutes once a day?
15 minutes once a day. That's right. And again, if he's got time, if you can get the second one in, great. But make sure you have the first one stacked with something that you do every day. And I think I mentioned earlier, but we did some tests with early beta users for this. And many people have aspirational habits. So they'll say like, hey, let me stack this with my meditation. It's like, okay, how many times have you meditated in the last 2 weeks? Once? Okay, no, you do it with your Netflix, because that's what you're doing every day. So make sure that whatever you're applying it to from a habit standpoint is a pragmatic, historical habit that you're going to be able to continue on with every day.
And how long would he need to consecutively do that before seeing noticeable benefits?
So the inflammation will start reducing within 24 hours. And so it really depends on, from a pain standpoint, what type of injury it is. When you have reduced inflammation in the area, the healing factors and the growth factors that come to that area and the recovery time start cutting down. So you get more growth factors in, you start healing that wound or injury faster. The degree of that depends on the degree of the injury in the first place. So, if it's a slap tear, it's one thing. It's a complete shoulder rebuild, that he'll have another level from a recovery standpoint. But the main thing is as soon as you start it today, that inflammation level is going to come down almost immediately, and you're going to see that increased speed of healing, and ideally also reduced discomfort. One thing that we do try to do with everyone is set a reasonable expectation relative to the pain and discomfort intervention levels they can expect. When the pain is driven by inflammation, you're going to see a night and day difference almost immediately. When it's not driven by when there's a mechanistic kind of underpinning, a mechanical underpinning for this, and we see this a lot with hips as well, then it takes longer. There's just going to be something. The light isn't going to fix, like if you've got bone on bone, you're not going to see that fixed overnight. What you will see is that you can start regrowing cartilage in areas where you've been thin on cartilage because of inflammation when you remove the inflammation from that area. But again, that's a weeks to months scale process. Cartilage is just a slower tissue to grow.
For me, for instance, I don't have any specific acute injuries. How would I, if you were in my shoes, how would you proactively work it into my daily routine? What would I benefit most from in just stacking that into my daily habits?
It's a great question. Personally, treat your lower gut and treat your neck. That proximal priority therapy almost just makes you superhuman from an immune response standpoint, and you just feel great from it. We also find that there's a really, and we have been doing some, there's been a bit of a shift in the environment around grants these days, but we've been putting in Alzheimer's and dementia grants with the NIH, because we're seeing really powerful impacts when you can increase kind of blood delivery, when you can decrease inflammation, when you can decrease oxidative stress in the brain. The risk and the outcomes that you see for neurological disease are really powerfully impacted. And we're seeing that not just with the disease, but also with neurological behavioral pathologies. And so that's depression, anxiety, ADHD, even fibromyalgia, where we're seeing really powerful studies starting into this. It's still early days. The studies they're human, but they're still on the small side of things. But we're anticipating that this is going to be a really powerful treatment long-term to be able to help people avoid things like, avoid or push back the outcomes of cognitive decline around Alzheimer's and a number of different types of dementia as well.
So in that case, just simply wearing the device on a daily basis, that compounded over a lifetime, that's where the benefit's going to come.
That's right. And you hear this 1% better every day. And this is really like the two powerful ways you can do that. One is that blood and lower gut treatment, and two is the brain. Your brain is just such a high leverage point of your experience as a human that making that investment and commitment into yourself to have healthier brain tissue longer term, the sooner you can start that, the better.
And that'll be with the next device that is penetrating deeper that you would wear, I'm assuming, on your skull?
You can use the current device. The 808, the 660 doesn't really penetrate through to this. The 808 does. And it actually has a very, very meaningful and substantial impact. The next device will be optimal. So that's kind of the trajectory we're okay right now. We want to have something where we're really providing optimal outcomes and optimal dosing at all levels of tissue. And that's our next product we'll be releasing in for the gut and for the brain in May. Nice.
So for me, if I just make it a habit of wearing the device on my neck for 15 minutes and lower abdomen region for 15 minutes every day, I'm stacking the chips in my favor, right?
100%. I think I started on this earlier, but I've got two kids, 5 and 9, two boys, and they drag in all kind of colds from school all the time. And I haven't been sick in months, like maybe a year now. I didn't notice this until halfway through. And again, it's N of 1, grain of salt it, but it's just an exciting thing to see as a technologist that we're actually able to make these type of differences. But I think that what you would see earlier out of that is you just feel really good on a daily basis. You produce more serotonin and dopamine in your gut than you do in your brain. And there's a big impact on that from treating with lasers. So again, the current device makes a difference, and you can feel it within about 2 weeks. Like it takes a little while for that to ramp up. And again, with a lot of these, one of the things that's been so exciting about this from a research standpoint is, in many cases, like this one, the gut is so multivariate that we know the dosing and we know the outcomes. People get sick less, their affect is better, all of this. But in many cases, we're still kind of working to delineate or parse what's happening and understand better on between the ABC and the XYZ, what is this jumble of letters in between that's actually mediating this effect. And so we'll be able to even dial it in further over the coming years as we get more back from our research partners on this.
Yeah, no, it's exciting stuff. And there's not really any, adverse effects or outcomes that come from it, right? Like, 'cause, I mean, with the infrared, the deep red, like there's no overdose, so to speak.
No, the overdose is just you go back to zero. Like you just don't, like if you ever overdose, you could leave it on for 2 hours, but you're going to go back to like the baseline. There's no negative impact for this. This is it's one of the reasons why we actually had a decision at the beginning of the design process for using class 2 or class 1 lasers, and we went and did testing on both of those. And not only did we find better outcomes from a safety and risk standpoint, obviously the lower power lower power lasers are going to be less dangerous and lower risk. We also found better outcomes. And so it's really nice to be able to see that in kind of on a daily basis. Again, this is, having gone through, I think, 34, 35 cycles of, we've built really complex mathematical models as to how these photons distribute through tissue. And we base our designs on that. And then we go back and test this in reality and say, all right, here's what model says, here's what we're seeing. How do we close that gap? And after, again, I think it's 34 or 35 cycles of that, we're closer on that than anyone in the world. So the dosing is as good as it gets. And we will introduce sensors into this eventually. That's something we'll be doing next year. Because again, we want to be able to demonstrate to people what objective changes we're making in their physiology. And there's some really cool technology coming down the pipe on this one. But yeah, that's maybe a teaser for the next chat, because it's still early days and we're still kind of working on how to roll that out relative to the real time changes in dosing that we can make from a therapeutic standpoint.
Totally. I've seen a lot of people in the biohacking space that are using these red lights to hopefully improve hormonal health and function, testosterone production. Is there any truth to that? I mean, these people putting red lights on their gonads or testicles, hoping to increase natural testosterone levels. Is that effective?
It is. I think one of the things that we see there is that you see small but real uptick in testosterone. What's also interesting for it, though, is from a sexual dysfunction standpoint, nitric oxides are a really powerful molecule in the body for that. And you see much better kind of outcomes relative to sexual impact, kind of from a sexual dysfunction standpoint, relative to testosterone. So I think the testosterone protocols, we haven't personally gone into test for them yet, but we do kind of keep a track of the literature in that, and it does move the needle. It's just not as substantial as it is from a sexual, like that range of impact on the sexual impairment to sexual function spectrum is really more powerful than the testosterone side.
Gotcha.
Ooh.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one follow-up for this is that we also, and I didn't know this, our obviously I'm male, our research team skews male, our engineering team skews male, and I think this is not an uncommon thing. We didn't know much about this from a hormone standpoint coming into this space, but with our users asking a lot of questions and wanting to know more about this, we've found that female hypothyroidism around perimenopause and menopause is really, really common. And one of the things that we can do is when you pair photobiomodulation with vitamin D3 and selenium, there's a synergistic outcome for impacting hypothyroidism. And so there's my business partner, one of the reasons we actually started digging into it as well is my business partner has Hashimoto's, and it's a very kind of similar thing to this kind of perimenopausal hypothyroid shift from a hormone standpoint. And we're seeing really powerful impacts for treating that. And so both from our users, but also from the medical literature in the space.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And from like a nitric oxide standpoint, I mean, that piques my interest because that's what I'm trying to optimize for when I'm training for bodybuilding purposes. Is there like a specific time? Like obviously doing it consistently and habitually is the most important thing. But if I'm trying to optimize from a performance standpoint, is there an ideal time to wear the device pre-workout, post-workout? Does that matter at all?
So there's different outcomes for that, at least from a research standpoint. If you're using it pre-workout, what we see is an increase in aerobic capacity. And this is typically around cyclical modalities from a training standpoint, like rowing, cycling, things like this, that people just are able to go further and faster from an aerobic exercise modality. Post-workout, what we find is if you're doing very high intensity workouts, what you triggers a lot of muscle damage, and there's muscle inflammatory markers where creatine kinase and C-reactive proteins are two good examples. These don't add anything to your strength gains, to your hypertrophy. They slow you down from coming back from intense workouts to do another intense workout, and so it slows down your progress essentially. And those respectively, we reduced by 60% and 80% in a 24-hour period. So really powerful impacts on muscle inflammatory markers.
And I would, in that setting, I would just put it around my neck, right? Like just simply optimizing blood flow through my neck.
For the aerobic piece, yes. Or you can also do your larger muscle groups. And so for me, so I'm still training CrossFit, and there's occasionally really heavy days for, for me, it's what I've seen the best result for kind of the delayed onset muscle soreness and muscle recovery is I know I'm going to be sore when it's a middle weight, but it's heavy volume. So if I'm doing, 200 front rack lunges, but not at a heavy weight, but just 200 of them, I am going to be sore tomorrow. And I know that. And so I'll bring the device with me if I see that on the programming where it's kind of a high volume, really kind of, like muscle endurance / hypertrophy type training.
High volume legs is the worst, man. I get so much more sore doing that than lifting heavy.
It's so systemically impactful. You just like your central nervous system, just mine at least, just freaks out, and it's like, oh man, don't do that again. Yeah, but if you treat these specific muscles for that, so treat the leg muscles on that. So and I did it just yesterday too. Oh my goodness, I forgot my device though at the house. My wife was sick, so she was using it for kind of the immune impacts. And I didn't. I looked at my bag after training yesterday, and I was like,
oh man, she's got it. You don't. What about your kids? You said 5 and 9, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes.
Do you have them wear it for any purposes?
I do when I can get it on them. We do kind of little like documentary learning things in the evening, and so I try to do that every day with them for immunity. Now that we've kind of immune health, now that we've noticed this really big difference. It's harder because there's just so many moving parts and like they're harder to track down and get onto a pattern. But they also, if they fall down and scrape their leg or something like this, the wound healing, and there's a ton of literature on this. This was one of the first things that was researched around it, particularly back in the 80s when NASA was starting to research photobiomodulation. Astronauts don't heal very effectively. So you could get a scratch and then like months later still have that if you're in space. You just don't, your recovery and wound healing just slows down. And there's a number of factors for it, and they're still kind of working on those. But one of the things that they have found is that photobiomodulation fixes that. And so the kids like that as well. That it's kind of like their Wolverine thing. If they fall down and scrape their knees or something like this, then they're good, like not quite overnight, but almost for the scratches when they can put this on there.
Huh, interesting. I guess astronauts probably aren't doing a whole lot of high volume legs either then.
It's so bad for you though. They're space brain is the kind of informal term for it, but you're seeing like if you took like TBI, kind of like NFL or something like this type TBI, boxing, MMA, and then combined it with Alzheimer's, it's like a combination of the worst kind of symptoms of both of those. And it's really nasty. People come back with really, really heavy impacts from it. And it's really nice to be able to be researching this, because we have started working with some different astronauts in this space. And we same thing with the NFL and MMA, we're working with the UFC guys and we just want to make an impact, make a positive impact where we can.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. That's very admirable. What's your long-term picture with the business? Do you feel like you'll stick with this one and build into this legacy brand that you just, pass on to your kids at some point, or where do you think things are going to go when you look into the future?
That's my hope. I think, as long as we're making a difference for people, we didn't build this business to exit. We built it to be impactful. And as long as we're getting better at that, and we are, our devices are getting better, our interactions with the users are getting better, our systems on how we kind of check those things and put a feedback loop in place, all of that's getting so much more impactful. And it gives you more it gives me more optimism for the future. And I tend to lean on the optimistic side of things in general. I think you have to as an entrepreneur, but for me, this is a lifelong one where we can keep getting better and better at delivering health outcomes and better lifestyles for people. The testimonials that we get in from our older users on a daily basis of, my wife couldn't sleep for 10 years because of sleep all the way through the night from chronic pain. Now she's sleeping through the night. She couldn't walk up the stairs. She was having to use these little scooters at the grocery store. That's why we're here, and we're achieving it. So it's, as long as we're achieving that, I'm going to be here doing it.
That's awesome, man. When you look back at your prior business ventures, and you mentioned earlier that you had reached a capacity with each of them due to your own limitations, and then you exited, what have you learned as a businessman now up to this point that you feel confident will keep you from hitting that threshold, that limiting factor with this business? Or if that's not the case, how are you going to set yourself up for success so that doesn't happen this go round?
I think you have to approach it from a lifelong learning standpoint. Again, the hubris of youth is not just ignorance. It's ignorance and the ignorance of the ignorance. So you don't know how ignorant you are when you're young. And when you find out how ignorant you are through a few different cycles of these type of things, you know that regardless of how well things go from an outcome standpoint, there's something that you're missing. There's something that you could be doing better. And it's the ignorance of ignorance that we should be targeting to eradicate. And you can't, no one's omniscient, but if you open yourself up to broader networks of people who you respect and give them and lose the ego enough to give them an opportunity to come in and talk to you about things like that. We as a business, it's one of the reasons why we kind of refer to ourselves as a non-ego shop. It doesn't matter whose idea it is. The janitor can challenge our atomic physicist PhD CTO on things if he feels that it's not going right. And you have to leave the ego out and be able to take on other people's input for it, because you're never going to have that full 100-degree perspective, and just leave open some level of respect for your colleagues and people external to you to be able to raise things that can be unknown unknowns, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%, man. Ego is the enemy for sure.
Yes. But again, when you're young, it's hard to know that without having seen a couple of cycles, and once you do see the cycles, regardless of how talented whoever is and whatever they're doing, world-class people at everything, everyone's got gaps. And so trying to close those and be honest with yourself and leaving the ego at the door, hopefully will help. We don't know, but hopefully will help improve outcomes and continue to let us grow and learn and expand as people.
Totally, man. I got one final question for you, brother. How do you structure your day? I'm always curious, talk to other businessmen, other entrepreneurs, other athletes to see how they allocate their time, because we all have the same amount of time.
Yeah.
How you prioritize it is going to be what your defining factor is. How you habit stack, how you build these routines into place. So how do you structure your day to be the most productive version of yourself?
For me, the mornings are the productive time. I'm up about 5. I've typically got training at about 6. Ice barrel, some kind of coffee, and I'm supposed to be. My nutritionist has said, "Hey, get back on the non-fasting piece." But I really like not eating in the morning. I feel more alert and awake, and so I kind of skate by on that and put a little bit, and then go straight into probably 6 hours of deep work, typically from calls and things like this. But most of the deep work structured around Pomodoros, which I found really useful. There's a number of different tools that I kind of stack in. I've had kind of lifelong ADHD, so there's different apps and like Endel is great from a sound standpoint. Pomodoros are great from a managing to a set time frame. We use a number of different tools for kind of external brain, like Notion, that really help me kind of manage different things that are gaps or weak points for me from a processing and focus standpoint. And then I would say at some point you have to get in a yoga nidra to kind of reset in the afternoon. There's something really powerful about being able to not necessarily have to nap, but being able to reset your brain in almost a nap style, like re-energizing. And then afternoon training of some sort, typically lifting in the afternoon, and more work through to. I like cooking, so I cook and I cook Sundays and then during the week for dinner, while my wife does kind of breakfast and lunch for the kids. So I think that's hopefully a reasonable framework.
Yeah. How do you disconnect when you get home to spend time with the kids?
That's a great question. Typically, I try to find something that they like and get into it with them. I just like learning stuff, and they've always got something new on their mind, and so they want to sit and talk or do something new. The little one, I played quarterback, and the little one wants to play quarterback, so it's a great alignment. He wants to go learn how to throw and do things like this. But finding kind of bridges or overlaps relative to what their interests are with what my experience and where I can add value for them has been. I think kind of how I've approached it. It's. I should have mentioned maybe earlier. My phone is off for any incoming calls. I haven't received an incoming call in years. It's always on kind of focus mode. So I don't like. I answer messages a bunch in my Pomodoro sprints, but then if it's not during that time, I'm really not like kind of on. I'm not on social media. So again, a lot of those things are just triggers for me for focus related issues that are kind of tough around ADHD. And so I've just had to kind of modulate as it works, as you can do around that, if that makes sense.
No, totally, man. I love it. I got another son on the way too. So like I'm trying to optimize my disconnect time when I get off work for the day. And it's challenging, but it makes you realize what's important in life for sure.
100%, yeah. And we also, with the kids, so our first training in the morning is with the kids. We have them on a Tabata protocol. You can't, when you're young, really add on a bunch of muscle. They don't have any hormones for that. But with kind of the neurological and balance and kind of explosiveness and things like this, they're getting great. And so that's really been working well, and we're going to kind of keep steering into that. They also like, and probably 3 or 4 times a week we do, you might find the same thing. They like anything that we kind of get into and get excited about. So, sauna and ice barrel, they jump into, and they're like, who can stay in the longest and this type of thing. So I got 2 boys. They're just, naturally competitive. Like if you put like anything on the table, they're like, they're going to compete about it. Like, oh, well, my hat is taller, or like anything they can compete about there. It's going to be competition.
Yeah. No, I love it, man. I love it. Well, awesome, Forrest. I really appreciate the time, man. I'm glad you kind of shed some light on bio-modulation light, so that makes sense. Super excited about the device. I got one. I'm going to start playing around with it. I'm going to let my workout partner use it for his shoulder and see if that makes a difference for him. Where do people go to find out more and dig deeper, brother?
Come check us out at KINEON.io, KINEON.io, or we're also on social media as KINEON, KINEON_labs, because we kind of feel like we are a lab. We're in the real world testing and trying to use technology to improve people's lives, and that's kind of just a real world lab. So that's where you can find us. I really appreciate the time today. This was a great discussion. Thank you so much for the awesome questions and awesome interaction.
Hey, my pleasure, man. We'll keep the conversation going.
All right.
See you, brother.
All right.